Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Islamic Awakening with me, Raza Ghazim. Freedom of expression is paraded as if it is the cornerstone of Western society. But scratch below the surface of that propaganda and a lot of hypocrisy is revealed. This concept is often instrumentalized as a means of targeting Islam and Muslims. But does Islam have freedom of expression, and are there limits? If there are limits, then is it truly freedom of expression?
In recent times, the issue surrounding Islam and freedom of expression has sparked a fiery debate. The limits of what is and what is not acceptable speech is becoming a new battleground between Islam and the West. Islam, however, allows for freedom of expression and even considers it an obligation when it comes to the interests of the entire community. Allah has defined what is and what isn't acceptable speech.
For freedom of expression within Islam, I think, like everything else, it has to be within the boundaries of, whether there's a positive message or there is a negative message. I think we need to really follow the guidelines of the Holy Quran on the freedom of expression. I think it's very important to let people and citizens of the Islamic world have a say, but again, not in a derogatory manner.
It's what I personally believe. At the end of the day, it's everyone's choice to say whatever. But then again, before you say something out loud to make public hear you, you need to make sure you're not having disrespect to someone who've actually had a message. Everyone will in this world have a message. So those people from the old days also had a message. Among them is the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
You want noble speech, you want good speech, you want constructive speech. You don't just say anything for the sake of it. So yeah, sure, freedom of expression, but within certain ethical boundaries.
To address these and other issues, we have our esteemed guest, Professor Tariq Ramadan. Welcome to the program.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. I wanted to start off by asking, does freedom of expression mean absolute freedom of expression? And has it, where does it exist, and has it existed ever?
So this is the starting point of the discussion, and there is no absolute freedom of expression in any country. It might be in the Western countries or elsewhere. We don't have something which is absolute freedom of expression. First, the very essence of freedom, and this is not coming from Islam, it's coming from even the Western philosophies, that you experience freedom when you know the limits of this freedom. So the very essence of freedom is defined by its limits, and this is Kant, the philosopher, the German philosopher, and the French philosopher Rousseau, who said that. This is the starting point. If you come now to all the Western constitutions, when it comes, for example, to racist statements or slanders, you have limits. You can't go, this is against the law. So you have to respect some rules if you want to live together and to to socialize. So absolute freedom of expression doesn't exist. And through history, what we had in all the societies is, yes, an evolution. Yesterday, in all the Western societies, for example, blasphemy was understood as something which was not acceptable. It's only recently that things are moving, but still today, even though some are saying we should have the right to blasphemy, at the same time they acknowledge the fact that there are things that we cannot say because this is against the law. Even in France today, for example, they are saying, oh, you know what, it's about Charlie, and we can, Charlie Hebdo, and we should be able to speak about everything. If you look at the French law, for example, it's against the law to discuss the historical event during the Second World War about the extermination of the Jews. If you say, I have doubts, this is against the law, and you are going to be fine on that. So it's as if, we speak about freedom of expression or absolute freedom of expression when it comes to religions, and especially when we speak about Islam, as you said in your introduction. But in fact, if you go and study the legal system, you see that there are limits.
And you mentioned Charlie Hebdo, and one of the things I remember is Dieudonné. He was interestingly arrested after some of the comments that he made about that.
He was not arrested, but he was prevented from performing, and in the name of, he was saying things that were considered as anti-Semitic. So this is where, even in less than 24 hours, he was prevented of speaking, and the political decision. So once again, you might disagree with him, but what about his right to speak out and to say what he wants to say? So many people said that in France by saying, we might be against him, but he should be allowed to speak and to perform. He's an artist. Because remember what happened with Salman Rushdie in the 80s was, oh, you know what, it's a novel. This is art. This has to do with, and now, 30 years later, when it comes to a French artist, say, oh no, there is no difference between arts and a public statement. So, as you said, lots of hypocrisy about the whole way this is dealt with. And for us, as human beings, as citizens, as Muslims, we have to come with a clear framework about what do we mean by freedom of expression and what could be the limits, if there are limits.
And one of the problems that this throws up is that we use this term, freedom of expression, and does it not create expectations of what people expect to be able to do and say and to get away with, if you like, when we keep using that term? Should we be using a different term?
I wouldn't say so. I think it's good to, because it's really, I should be free to speak my mind. So this is what we mean by this. And once again, from an Islamic perspective, this is from the very beginning. What would be the meaning of having shura, which is consultation, if I'm not free to speak my mind, to express myself? So freedom, it's an essential Islamic value, not only when it comes to expression, when it comes to thinking, when it comes to moving. And Ardullahi wasi'a, the earth of God, God's earth is vast. So you should be able to, there is a right to migrate in Islam. There's the right to migrate. So it's my freedom to move, my freedom to speak, and my freedom to think. These are principles that we shouldn't undermine, we shouldn't compromise in any discussion when it comes to this. Now, the way you use your rights, this is a very important discussion.
And within the concept of some of the thing is that, are we using this idea of freedom of expression and the points that you make, are these kind of borrowed concepts that we are kind of implanting on top of Islam, or are these concepts, that are deeply rooted, and are there examples that you can give of how you can justify what you're saying?
No, they are deeply rooted in the Islamic tradition, and this is today that we have the West saying these are our universal values, and this is not known by the Muslims. Remember, in the Middle Ages, the West and the Catholic Church was looking at the Muslims saying, oh, it's all permissible there. And when it comes to freedom, when it comes to science, when it comes to sexuality, oh, they have no limits, these Arabs and these Muslims and these Asian people. It's as if now it's the other way around. So we are the free people and you are under, religious authority and religious limits and dogmas that are not helping you to be free. From an Islamic perspective, you have to come back to the essential. So when it comes first to understanding the world, this freedom to knowledge, to know about the world, is rooted. Iqra, which is mean the world, read the book. So reading, it's part of this intellectual freedom that we need to have when it comes to science, and this is in our tradition so important. So this starting point when it comes to freedom, it's important. Now, when it comes to religion, for example, lakum dinukum waliya din, you have your religion and I have my religion. So you are free to decide, and you have it. فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ. The one who wants, he can believe, and the one who wants, he can reject belief. So this is something which is essential, that there is no act of faith without freedom first. And when it is said in the Quran that Allah gave us dignity, the scholars were saying this dignity is based on two things. First is knowledge, second is freedom. That we are free to believe and free to reject this and to decide. Third dimension here is what I was saying before, is أمرهم شورى بينهم. How are we going to deal with our social affairs? By discussing, by talking to one another, to have the deliberation, consultation, and this is based on individuals have their own opinion. To the point that when you go to the one who has the authority, as it happened with the companions, they were talking to the Prophet, peace be upon him, in a way which is discussing opinions, because they had opinions. So this was open to the people, and the best jihad is kalimatu haqqin amam sultan ja'ir, is when you are facing a tyrant and you have a word of truth. This is where it's the highest level of jihad in our Islamic understanding. So freedom and freedom of expression is rooted in the Islamic tradition from a rational viewpoint, scientific viewpoint, social viewpoint, and political viewpoint.
All of those freedoms and those points that you mentioned, you know, to do with resistance, to do with learning, are precisely those things. But freedom of expression is developing the art way in whichever way, you know, that you want to, and you feel, okay, this is where I'm going to go. And that expression, that could be quite contrary to sensibilities, whatever those sensibilities happen to be. So how does Islam deal with those, or how do Muslims deal with those particular things?
From an Islamic perspective, which once again is not, in fact, the majority of religions and civilizations and spiritualities agree upon one thing, is that to every single right you have, there is a duty that is coming with it. So you have to know how to deal with your rights. So, for example, you are in a society, yes, you have the right to insult, but you have to do the duty, the social duty, the deep ethical teaching that has to do with respect not to do it. I can.
And does this right to insult, sorry to interrupt, but this right to insult, does that also extend to the Islamic tradition as well?
No, this is from an Islamic perspective, what you have is that you have the right. You can do it, but from a religious understanding, an ethical understanding, you are not going to do it. From an Islamic perspective, for example, you don't insult or ridicule other religions or beliefs, or, for example, the people who are disabled. For example, in the West, everybody would understand and say, you know what, when I meet a disabled or someone who has a physical problem, I'm not going to laugh at this. It's legal, you can do it, but you're not going to do it because this is something which is rooted in your education, ethical understanding. For us, when it comes to religion, when it comes to the sense of the sacred, this is exactly the same for us. We don't play with this. And this is why when some Arabs and even some Muslims, when they were ridiculed in, you know, the cartoons, for example, they decided we are going to do the same to the Jews. We are going to laugh at what happened during the Second World War. I say that's not the Islamic answer. Your Islamic answer is not to answer back by ridiculing their suffering, because we don't laugh at that. The best understanding here is to say, you know what? I think that you may have the legal right to do it, but you have the moral duty to avoid it. That's the understanding, that's the intellectual critical distance that we need to have. And from an Islamic perspective, you would say we put some limits to this freedom of expression, but I would suggest to Muslims, don't think that by putting law, we are going to solve the problem. We need to put more education and not always thinking that we are going to solve the problem by law.
There is that ethical dimension that you talk about in terms of why it is not nice, and you know, Islamic ethics say that you shouldn't do it. But why are the limits actually there? I mean, should just people develop a thicker skin?
Two things are important, because I think that, yes, I said to the Muslims, for example, when I was in Denmark, when the first cartoon crisis started, I said, look, take an intellectual critical distance. And especially when you live in Western countries, because things are done here that are not done in India, they are not done in other non-Muslim majority countries. You don't see this. People are not used to laugh at the sacred or what the people believe in. So in some context, in some society, you have to be patient, you have to be wise, you have to know how to react. Now, at the same time, you are a citizen. And for example, I'm a European citizen. I'm a European Muslim citizen. And I need to understand my role in this society here. Am I just going to try to avoid being attacked, or am I have to understand my role as a witness to my message before human beings? Meaning I have to spread around and to share with people a sense of dignity here. So this is where we need to say, you know what? You can laugh at this, but I don't like it. And then you nurture a sense of responsibility. This is what we need today. And for Muslims, as you said, at the same time, just be patient, take a distance, a critical distance, and at the same time, try to educate the people around you and try to let the people understand why you don't laugh at things. There are things that are not laughable. And this is very important. This has to do with your deep spiritual journey that the people should understand.
Thank you for that. We like to keep this show as interactive as possible and really value your opinion. Here is what you sent us this week.
This week we asked, how important is freedom of expression in Islam? Sheila from Germany says, Islam allows for free speech. It is only restrained where freedom to express would result in harming the cause of truth and society largely. And Khalid from Canada says, I would like to highlight the fact that the basic human right of freedom of speech has its limits. We need to recognise that any right or freedom ends where it starts infringing upon the rights and freedoms of others. And that's all the comments we have for this week. Don't forget to leave your views on our Facebook and Twitter page.
In Muslim majority countries, are the limits with regards to freedom of expression correctly, and I know there are many Muslim countries, are correctly set? I mean, what are the issues around setting these limits?
I think that it's very difficult to speak in general. We have to take country by country, but there are two main problems. The first one is that very often there's a superficial way of protecting Islam by saying anything that you are going to say against Islam you are going to be jailed or judged and go to trial because of what you said. And I think we have to have a bigger picture here, that before just targeting the people and instrumentalizing Islam against people, because very often it could be opponents to the regime, for example, as we have in the Gulf states, for example, say, look, first, in political terms, before instrumentalizing religion and say you said something against religion, let us have an agreement on the fact that citizens should be free to speak in political terms, meaning I should be free to speak against the government. I should be free to speak against the rulers. I should be free to speak my mind, which is not there. So we don't have the essential freedom, and we come and say, oh, you spoke against religion, and then you are, and it's a way to instrumentalize religion by the government to show to the people we are the guardian of religion, while you are the guardian of your own government. You are the guardian of your power. You are the guardian very often of your corruption, not of the Islamic principles of freedom of expression for citizens and freedom of thought and speech. So this is the first problem. The problem is the way religion is instrumentalized. The second thing that we have, and we have to be true about this, that in some Muslim majority countries there is a double standard, is that we can't say things about Islam that we can say about Christianity, and this is wrong. This is wrong. The Prophet, peace be upon him, from the very beginning, when he started in Medina to organize this society, it was the same rights and the same duties for Muslims and Jews and people of other faiths. This is what we need to have. So no one should be, in Muslim majority countries, targeted for his or her religion, be him or her a Hindu, a Buddhist, a Christian, or a Jew. So that's wrong. That's not our religion. Our religion is consistency, is the starting point of everything. So we have two problems here, that sometimes is double standard and sometimes is no freedom at all, and we use anything against the people who are speaking about religions.
There's also something else that you talked about earlier, and I want to explore this a little bit further, which is the idea of speaking truth to power, that freedom of speech. I mean, that could be done within the context that this is something that's often going to be done in against the will or against what the government actually wants you to do. So they don't want you necessarily to exercise that. So there is a concept of resistance involved here, as well as just speaking, having that right to freedom of expression.
Yes, it's even, in fact, a real open or democratic or anything which is faithful to the Islamic principle should by law give the right to the citizens to speak the truth to the government, which means you can challenge the government. By law, this should be protected. And sometimes it's not. And what we have today in the great majority of the Muslim majority countries, it's not there, that it's very difficult to speak the truth or to be free to speak. So it means that in this situation, in the name of freedom of thought and freedom of expression, you should resist the government by being able and to speak out, to speak your mind. And this is where the civil society is important. It's very important for the citizens to understand their duties towards freedom of expression and also to be courageous. It's something that we have to repeat. A Muslim citizen, by definition, should be a free citizen and a courageous citizen. Somebody who is speaking his or her mind in a way which is, I got this from my tradition. Abu Bakr Siddiq and other leaders in the Islamic tradition, Ali Karramallahu Wajha, they were helping and opening up to the people to speak their mind. And they were open to criticism and they were open to listening to people. It's now that there is something which is a distorted way of dealing with our religion, instrumentalizing Islam by saying, in the name of Islam, you have no right to speak. That's exactly the opposite. In the name of Islam, you have the duty to speak. One
of the things that sometimes happens is, we have the Western power structure talking about freedom of speech being the cornerstone, and yet it is in alliance with countries like, for example, Saudi Arabia or Bahrain, and there is any dissent is, you talked about the idea of legally allowing this to happen, but actually it's legally not allowed to happen. Why does this alliance take place? Because it's almost helping to in essence, just firm up this idea that you can stop that dissent actually having place, or stopping that freedom of expression.
Because I think that we have to be serious about this, and we have to go beyond hypocrisy. Is that what we have today when, the Western countries are speaking about freedom of expression and freedom of speech, what comes first for them is geostrategic interest and profit. It's not freedom, it is not democracy. So if not, it would be completely different, and their international relationships would be different. They don't care about this. So, for example, we don't speak about no freedom of expression in almost all the Gulf states. We don't speak about no democracy. We don't speak about the fact that the West supported for so many years in Tunisia or in Egypt or in the Arab world so many dictatorships, and not only in the Muslim majority countries, in Asia and in South America. That's exactly the same. They don't care. So it's just a discourse that is using human rights to avoid speaking about economic interest and geostrategic interest. So this is the very meaning of it. And I kept on repeating, and I keep on repeating, as Western citizens, let us be consistent and try to deal with what you are talking about. So not only it's not working with some Muslim majority countries here, but even, as we said at the beginning, if you look at what is happening within Western societies, you will see that within Western societies there are things that you can say and things that you cannot say, which is within double standards, that there are double standards that we see day in, day out. So I would say here that our critical take here is to stick to our principles and to be able to look at all the contradictions and to speak out against these contradictions.
A lot of interesting points. No doubt the exercise of freedom of expression will continue to engage all sections of society in discussion. But perhaps the point that needs to be made at the forefront is that it is not possible for a society to exist that allows absolute freedom of speech. It is for the Muslim to argue that Islam's limits are the right limits for freedom of expression. The time is up for today's topic. I would like to thank Professor Tariq Ramadan for his views on the topic, and of course all of you at home for watching. Goodbye until the next time and another edition of Islamic Awakening.